Good early evening, ladies and gentlemen, and all attendees for tonight. Welcome to Job Seeker Strategies in 2022, the Staffing Management Association of New Jersey's very first event of this year. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention here today. My name is Travis Fagan, and I am the founder and principal of Pivotal Point Career Consulting. And I am honored to be serving as the Director of Programs for the Staffing Management Association of New Jersey, a specialty branch of SHRM that is centralized around hosting the most topical and pertinent business events, specifically catered towards the staffing and recruitment industry. It's a pleasure and honor to be the host here today. Now, just a quick reminder to all of our attendees, both new and veteran, the event is being recorded, so we are going to be sending out a copy of this recording about a week or so after taking place today to every one of you who are attending. This will allow you to catch up on any pertinent details that you may have missed, will allow you to sync up on everything afterwards. And of course, you can feel free to share it over to your colleagues. We always welcome the extra dispersal. You'll also be able to check out the video on SMA's YouTube page, where we're going to be consistently updating our year's curriculum of virtual events as they take place. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Always want to say that. Secondly, to preserve the audio quality of this program, I please ask that all of our attendees, aside from our speakers, of course, to please mute your microphones. I'm sure throughout the course of today's program, there are going to be a variety of questions that are going to be on your mind. I absolutely urge you, please send those questions over into our chat window, and we will be segmenting some time at the end of today's program where we're going to be addressing all of your questions in detail. So please do not be shy about sending them over our way. We're looking forward to answering them. And so, as we officially kick things off, it's my pleasure to introduce SMA's current president, Lisa Panarello. Lisa, I'd love to have you say some hellos to everybody.
Thank you, Travis. I'm just really excited to kick off our 2020-22 with you at the helm of programming, and I appreciate everyone joining us tonight. SMA, as you know, we're a specialty chapter dedicated to recruiters, talent acquisition specialists, and sourcing agents across New Jersey, and the whole HR function at large. We've got a really great year ahead of us, programming, learning opportunities, volunteer opportunities. So I invite you to really stay in touch. You're going to get emails from us. You're going to have resources on our website. We're coming out with a new website in a couple of months, so stay tuned for that. So I just really want to make sure that we are always here for your recruiting and staffing knowledge needs. So with that, just keep looking out for our emails and our resources, and kick it back to you, Travis.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's fantastically well said. And yes, very true. Fantastic things are coming along the pipeline with SMA, both the new website, the new YouTube channel, and everything that we have planned for the rest of this year. So we got a lot of good stuff coming for you. Speaking of good stuff, I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our incredibly highly regarded and esteemed panelists that we have for Job Seeker Strategies here for today. And so I'm going to be taking them one by one, that they're going to be offering some of their own particular insights within the both job candidate side, the job recruitment and talent acquisition side from today's job market as it exists today. So to introduce our speakers, first, I would love to say a quick hello to Christiane Rejo from Foot Locker Corporate. Christiane graduated from Muhlenberg College in 2011. From there, she worked for a biotech company before starting her recruiting career at a female-owned boutique firm in New York City, Atrium Staffing. Christiane joined Foot Locker Incorporated in September 2016 as a talent acquisition manager, overseeing the recruitment for human resources, finance, real estate and strategy, and legal for North America. She was promoted to senior manager, taking on the recruitment of marketing and merchandising within North America, and most recently was promoted in 2021 to overseeing the European team's recruitment as well. The candidate experience has always been at the forefront of Foot Locker's hiring process, so much so that a year-long project of Reimagine TA was dedicated to revamping the end-to-end process of recruitment, where Christiane led the candidate experience and offer process work streams. Christiane, it's a pleasure and an honor. Really happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here with you all.
Wonderful. And going on from Christiane, we have Jonathan Williams, the Director of Talent Acquisition from NBC Universal. He is supporting strategic staffing and business partnerships for both broadcast and cable businesses. He's a human resources professional with more than 10 years of HR experience that includes compensation, human resources, information systems, and talent acquisition. Prior to the entertainment sector, he spent 5 years in academia for the UC Regents, exercising HR policies for the College of Letters and Sciences, as well as maintaining a professional track and field career in the 400 hurdles that took him to 2 world championships and the Olympic Games in Beijing. Mr. William holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology from the University of California, Los Angeles, and MBA from Pepperdine University. Jonathan, pleasure to have you with us here today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, and excited about this opportunity.
Very, very much same, Jonathan. Thank you. Moving along next to our panel speakers over on the job candidate side, we have Mark Ramdaris. Mark is a multidisciplinary art director from New York. He's based in various cities, and he safely travels to be closer to his clients. Mark has worked for a vast array of and a highly impressive portfolio of clients, talking about VaynerMedia, Budweiser, Anthony Club Ultra, Nike New York and LA, Adidas, and the Sci-Fi Channel, just to name a few. Working with creatives of color, he prefers to tell stories that go against the grain or thinking how we can do more for future generations, and that's what gets him excited. When he's not working, silk screening and studying traditional 2D animation keep his creative cup filled. Mark, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Travis. Happy to be here.
Pleasure is mine. Pleasure is mine. And then finally, last but not least, we have Michelle Chen, research assistant of CUNY, the City University of New York. Michelle is a recent graduate of Hunter College with a BA in psychology. She currently works as a research assistant through the Research Foundation at CUNY. The project she works on examines substance use prevention and barriers to mental health, help seeking among Asian American adolescents. Her job search strategies consist of reaching out to professional and personal contacts for opportunities, college resources, and social media. Michelle plans to further her education by pursuing a PhD in clinical psychology to one day work as a clinical psychologist. Michelle, as our fourth panelist, it's a pleasure. Glad to see you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely terrific. The pleasure is absolutely all mine. As you can see, folks, we have a fantastic panel assembled here today, and we're hoping that we really have some great content to parse through and a lot of topical information to be sharing from these questions that we're going to be going through. So without any further ado, let's say we get into it. So going first over to our talent acquisition side. Christian, I think it makes the most sense to start in that we are working in this particular event, centralizing in how the job market is today. How does your day-to-day in talent acquisition evolve now versus how it panned out in the pre-COVID world?
So I would say that our day-to-day specifically hasn't changed so much. Obviously, with the flexibility and everyone being virtual, it presents a unique case in terms of how are we connecting with candidates or how are we connecting with our teams better in this virtual space, whether it's having more of the video type interviews as opposed to a phone screen. But the specific day-to-day, I would say, hasn't changed as much. It's more so how we go about recruiting and how the candidate market has changed so much. And I think the flexibility piece is huge, especially when our schedules work around a candidate's schedule. So I think how we go about recruiting has changed so much, but not necessarily the specifics day-to-day.
It was actually kind of refreshing to hear that we're not really starting from the ground up, right? That, some
Totally.
Some of the brass tacks are still working as the brass tacks and for a good reason. Jonathan, does your particular experience, does that seem to lie in tandem with Christian's, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah, no, I'll definitely, copy and paste most of what Christiane had mentioned. I will say, just from a logistics standpoint, I think our recruiters have more of a higher productivity of a day without the commute. We're able to fit in a lot more phone screens, a lot more video screens. We're able to be a little bit more flexible with our hiring managers about outside the box thinking of candidates, because if they're thinking, hey, if I layer in candidates that are outside of the typical scope, they're able to say, hey, what is it to have maybe 30 minutes of virtual time in your scheduled day to meet with this outside of the box candidate, as opposed to prior or pre-pandemic, where they're like, oh, I have a meeting to go to, we're having somebody drive out, putting in passes. So I think it really kind of gives, it lends itself to a broader slate and swath of candidates, and really kind of like cranking out, phone screens, information we're able to give back to our hiring managers and our HR partners.
Very, very insightful. Thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate that. Well, so I'd say moving on over to our job candidate side of the fence. So, Michelle, would really love to ask you to begin things. Is when you're evaluating a new job opportunity, being that I know that this is currently in your space, looking now into the market with a little bit of a fresh set of eyes, having been a recent college graduate yourself. From this perspective, what would you say is the single most important criteria for you? If there is one that would outline over to the top, would you say that might be something like salary, company culture, advancement opportunities, work-life balance, or even an office location?
I think as of right now, my most important consideration is advancement opportunities, mainly because I'm searching for opportunities that would help boost my graduate school applications, since a lot of PhD programs tend to value research experience over company or clinical experience. I've been focusing a lot of my energy on that. But, I do think salary is important, but I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where it's not my main concern, although I know that's not the case for a lot of people. And I think postgraduate school, that mindset's definitely going to change because I'm going to have a lot more life responsibilities, such as paying bills and maybe supporting myself and other people. So even though it's not a concern right now, I do expect salary to be one of the top, if not the top criteria when I'm considering job positions.
Thank you for that, Michelle. That's also, once again, very insightful from the perspective that you're in over into the market now. Mark, you actually posed a pretty interesting counterpoint to Michelle's particular branch in the job market, being that you have a pretty well-established portfolio for yourself. I know that you have a pretty illustrious career that has already been ahead of you. So your particular expectations now, where would you say in terms of like the priority queue, like those particular criteria would have to be when it comes to evaluating a new potential role?
I do too value the compensation package. Health insurance is not as important to me at this stage of my life, knock on wood, but I feel the ability to be part of a community, give back in a way that's greater than my service to that company is so very important. Some organizations have really, really big philanthropic packages in which they match volunteer opportunities, hours, and stuff like this. And in my career, I feel like I just want to give back, be it to junior level designers and creatives within the organization, not directly on my team, or again, to the community surrounding or that is directly impacted by that brick and mortar or that office or that team being wherever they might be.
Very admirable. That's a great place to be. And I think that we can almost certainly agree that that's something that we would all want to take a vested interest in all of our careers and all of our professions, to be able to make sure that we have enough time and opportunity to be able to give back into the community, into different organizations and different fundraising and charitable contributions wherever we can. And so, well, piggybacking from there, now that we've gotten some perspectives again over onto our panelist candidates experience, then going back over to your side, Jonathan, speaking to where they have been in their professional journey, going back over to your TA side, in your experience, what do you think not enough new candidates are doing in this day and age to stand out professionally?
Yeah, I would say, I've always preached this kind of even pre-pandemic, but even now, I think it's such a candidates market where there's kind of like the pick of the litter. So you're putting your application out there, you're getting interviews, recruiters are reaching out to you, your inbox has never been so full in terms of having opportunities and phone screens to step into an organization. But what I think it's also kind of like lacking is the research of the companies, the passion for what that particular company is doing. To Mark's point, like, if philanthropy is definitely important to you, do you know who you're interviewing for has a double bottom line? Is that something that's important to that company? What have they done recently? How have they shifted within the pandemic? what's, earnings call looking like, what's guidance is looking like. And so when someone comes to an interview and doesn't really know a lot about the company, it kind of, makes them more kind of like lackluster and not shine as probably they should be by just simply doing the research of the company, because they don't necessarily quote unquote have to anymore, because another interview request is going to come in their inbox 30 minutes later from another recruiter from another company. So I would say, the name of the game always is from here on out and of late is to just do the research on the company. Do you find a company that's going to prioritize what's important to you and have that mix of compensation and flexibility, and really kind of are aligning with what your goals and aspirations are. So I would say the research component is what's lacking in the candidate market.
Brutally honest, Jonathan, which I think that's exactly what we're looking for.
You have to be here.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're all here for, an informational deep dive, both on the candidate side and the recruiting side. We want to know what's working, what's not working. Christiana, I saw you nodding in pretty emphatic agreement with Jonathan on that answer as well. Anything else you wanted to piggyback on from there? It sounds like you have a similar experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely echo everything Jonathan's saying. I think doing your research and doing your homework is huge. For us specifically with Foot Locker and what we're doing in the community and as an organization, we're doing so much. So when we're speaking to candidates and they're able to say, okay, I saw your investment in XYZ organization, that's fantastic, tell me more about it. It shows that they're a lot more engaged. So I think the homework and research piece is huge. Not definitely from a recruitment perspective, but I think specifically when you're speaking with the hiring manager and the interview team, it's that much more impactful from that perspective. And I think a second kind of component to that as well, which is also, I think, referring back to doing your homework, like Jonathan had mentioned, is having a few solid, unique questions for each interview that you're a part of. So asking me a couple questions and not just your generic one of what's a day in the life like, that's on the job description. So I would hope that that going into the interview, but a little bit more thoughtful type questions. And once you're in the actual interview process, having unique questions for each interviewer. Because when we get back in debrief, a lot of times we'll speak about, okay, what did the candidate ask you? And if the same question was asked to each person, I wouldn't say it's a red flag, but it's a little bit of a lack of creativity, if you will.
It seems that maybe you'll agree on this, Christian, too, that it seems that often folks know that the importance in the interview is asking questions, but not necessarily. A lot of times they might just go onto a BuzzFeed article and say like the top 10 questions to ask over to your reviewer.
Exactly.
Right. That's not really reflecting personally who you're speaking with or the organization itself. So it actually seems like we have a pretty interesting route of dialogue going right now in this particular area, which is why I wanted to keep that going in a similar vein. Mark, over back to you in terms of, just how far the applicants and the candidates are going into their research, or really, what their overall, how far their interest goes into applying over into a position that might not necessarily be at the top of their queue, or how far they would go. So basically, to make that a little bit more clear, Mark, have you ever applied to a position that you were not necessarily initially all that interested in? And, if so, how far did you go into the evaluation process there? Would you have considered going even further if it went further?
Just to speak to my specific role as a creative, I'm not sure who amongst the audience is an art director or what have you, but I have the fortunate benefit of working with recruiters who will see my portfolio book and send me to people and companies that I don't really know about or don't have top of mind. Some of them work in industries that aren't as interesting to me. So to answer your question directly, yes, they give me visibility to places and things that I wouldn't consider. And after learning more about the organization, I begin to weigh what interests me, and I do my own research to find out what about this company might align with my beliefs and things I might want long-term or short-term if it's project-based. But I have a tendency of being really optimistic and finding the good in everything and everyone. So I can fall in love really easily with the company, but it's really tough to get me to want to stay long-term. And I try to look out for red flags because there are a lot of emails coming steadily through inboxes, and I'm more or less just looking for enough check boxes to make me not want to open the other offer that's coming across the table and learn more about the company while I'm there.
Okay, makes a lot of sense, Mark. And it sounds like at the same time you are doing your due diligence with vetting out the information that sounds like we're all in agreement on, that is very, very essential for everyone's side to make sure the fit is right. Michelle, would you happen to piggybacking off of that, being into the new part of the process, has there been any cases where you have gone a little bit further into a role that you weren't necessarily initially all that interested in? And how far did you go into that whole particular process?
Yeah, I have. And I guess how far I go into the evaluation process depends on how this position will help further my academic and professional career. For some positions, I've submitted the application and then I've decided I didn't really want to invest my energy and time into a role that I wouldn't consider fulfilling. And for others, I've actually completed the interview process and I've received an offer that I ended up declining. And a lot of the times I actually declined the offer because I received one that I thought was better for my personal growth, for just like my personal enjoyment as well. And I think Bart kind of touched upon this, but doing your research, Jonathan and Christiane also touched upon it, but doing your research is really critical. And I think especially for me as like a new professional, like I really have to kind of be careful in deciding where I want to go, whether this is going to help me in my future career.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Michelle. I appreciate the insight over onto your perspective too. It's good to know that it seems like folks aren't just necessarily pulling the trigger right away and going onto the first job just because it is a job, and are still making sure that they're landing into a home. Just a quick note, I know we had a couple of different folks just happened to join as we were beginning. Just to remind everybody that feel free, while keeping your microphones muted, please feel free to submit a question to any one of our panelists over into the chat. We'll have some time to cover those later with the time allowing. So going back over into our talent acquisition panelists then. So Christiane, it seems that you and Jonathan happen to agree that one of the most pressing issues into the application process is the folks that aren't necessarily doing enough of their due diligence on the research of the company. Is there any other pressing new challenge that that recruiters are facing in the market today?
I would say, and I think Jonathan had mentioned it, how much of a candidate market it is right now. So that's definitely been, I don't want to say a struggle per se, but definitely a shift in terms of, in the beginning of COVID, it was very much on the company side, and we were able to really kind of choose who we were looking for. Versus I think now it's, and I know Michelle touched upon it as well, when we speak with candidates, they might be interviewing with 5+ other places. So I think communication is super key. I think it's always key in a process, but now more than ever, having an understanding and having that relationship with the candidate of, okay, not where else are you interviewing, but how active are you in your search? Keep me posted with updates. When we're getting to the offer process, having an understanding if they have other offers in hand. And again, similar to what Michelle said, candidates are receiving multiple offers. So I think that's definitely a shift now over the past maybe year or so, I would say, in terms of what we're kind of facing now.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think the question came up in the chat that speaks to this, that we're doing more of a chasing of the candidates. We have been more ghosted by candidates and from that experience. And so, pre-pandemic, where we're able to send out an email or interview request form, and they're like, yes, happy to chat at any time. Now we're sending follow-up emails where we wouldn't have before, because we're like, oh, well, if they're not interested or not responding, then so be it. But now we're, setting up follow-up emails, like, just in case you didn't get this. So we're being a little bit more stalkery in a healthy way when it comes to that. But I would also say, from a compensation standpoint, there's a lot more competitors, and I'm sure with all of our industries that we didn't think that were competitors before. I didn't compete against the Apples and the Googles, and the smaller tech or coin-based companies before, and now that we are. So it's definitely a wide open option, a la carte menu for candidates, and it's having us to be a little bit more energized about going after the candidates that we want.
It's rough and nice counterpoint there, Jonathan. Makes a lot of sense. Really appreciate that. Kicking it back then over to our job candidate panelists, Michelle, I wanted to talk to you about something that I know is another very topical trending issue into the application process, and that is the overall workspace, the virtual workspace, the hybrid workspace. And so I wanted to ask you, when it comes to evaluating your workspace, are you still open to working in an office environment? Would you prefer to work remote, or would you prefer something that might serve as a dual function hybrid space?
I mean, I personally prefer a hybrid workspace because of the flexibility it offers. Working remotely definitely has its perks, such as not having to commute, which definitely saves a lot of money, or having to stick to like a strict work schedule as long as I meet my deadlines and complete my work. However, it is a bit difficult considering the fact that like I have other family members working from home and like my sisters are attending classes, so it's really hard to find a quiet space to work in, which was a major issue at the beginning of this pandemic. And then in terms of working on site, I feel a lot more productive working outside just because there's less distractions, and it's also a lot easier to build relationships with others, which I think is a pretty important aspect of work satisfaction. But also like some people don't have a stable internet connection or like have a computer that they can personally work on for 8 hours a day. So those devices are really essential to successfully work from home. And you can't really get that with a remote workspace. And while it's not entirely applicable for me, I've noticed through like personal accounts and just like stories online about workplaces that offer remote or like hybrid workspaces. And I've noticed that it's been like pretty beneficial for people with disabilities or whether they be like physical or mental health concerns, and those who take care of like children or family members. They don't have to make the daily strenuous commute. They don't have to converse face to face as much, and they can like watch over their children if they suddenly have to stay home. And then for me as well, working hybrid means that I get to kind of it's a lot more flexible for me just because sometimes I have like random meetings that pop up due to last minute projects or changes. So having that flexibility has been really beneficial for me.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for that very much. I think your experiences speak to a very broad reflection of how a lot of folks are really appreciating the perks of the hybrid workspace. I think recruiters are definitely seeing that as well. And that I noticed that Christiane and Jonathan are both nodding right now, and it seems like that is definitely something that seems very much akin to what you're noticing over onto the candidate side as well. Before I flip that over to you guys, Mark, what were your thoughts, given that I know that you've traveled quite a bit over into your career, you've worked on a freelance basis with quite a few different clients on your end as well. Do you have an outlying, like hard to find preference now in terms of whether you're looking to go back over into an office or to be completely remote or somewhere in the middle?
I love what Michelle said and have to agree. Shout out to the moms at home, and having the chance to stay at home with kids and take care of things is a godsend. I'm a minority, but also in the majority of people that have great Wi-Fi. I'm healthy and I love tech, but as a creative, I feel I suffer not being able to work next to my counterparts, and people of my background probably moved to New York to be around the people and to have commutes though they're stuffy, like the commutes and seeing people refills my creative cup. And I would love to have a hybrid, but so long as things are safe, I'm willing to work in-house 9 to 5 too, respectfully of anyone else's like concerns about safety too. If I may say, like, I think it's known, but there are some big organizations, Nike, I'm not sure if Google is doing it too, but that has required much of their workforce to return to office and be vaccinated too. So in some cases, it's not really an option.
Yeah, very, very agreed. And it's very much a shame when companies, especially the big companies like Google, kind of take the option away. I don't think that's really what most people are really looking for. But it does seem like, and this is encouraging, that it seems like there's a lot of symmetry in terms of what people want and expect and are looking for, and it seems to be towards that that hybrid application in their workspace. And so, Jonathan, flipping over to you, since we were talking about the hybrid workspace and that a lot of candidates are preferring that, I think that's kind of a given. But let's say, perfect world, we go into more of a God willing, we go into less of a COVID-centric landscape where we're able to, get out of the next variant and we can have a regular life once again. Do you think even in that particular circumstance, there's going to be a greater retention on working remote, or do you think that there is a good chance that the in-office environment would end up making a comeback?
Yeah, I think there are, certain functions, I think that during the pandemic, our organization has looked at to see what can truly be remote. From the standpoint, let's just say technology, and talking about competing against technologists that are applying to like a Google or an Apple, we may not be able to compete from a compensation standpoint, but if we're able to say, hey, person, you can work in this sector of technology out of Texas or Oklahoma or Kansas, with giving the kind of the same pay, and see us giving an allowance to have that person, work in that particular sector. I think that the majority of us, we're wanting a hybrid model. That's what the candidates want as well. I think that balance and from a generational standpoint, a lot of us are in the sandwich generation, would appreciate the hybrid model by having flexibility to kind of go in and out. It's becoming a little bit synonymous with compensation, where people are willing maybe to sacrifice some compensation to be hybrid or remote. So that's also a negotiating kind of pull and pulley of how we're able to kind of get talent in the door. But we just did kind of candidate surveys. We're trying to kind of pay attention to what that looks like from a candidate experience standpoint. And just kind of a general quick stat we just learned of was that a majority of the candidates that took our survey of NBC Universal mentioned that they would still entertain an opportunity at NBC Universal had we not been remote or hybrid. So there's that population of the candidate pool that are saying, I would love the opportunity to work on this brand or show, even if it wasn't remote or hybrid. But we still have to kind of keep that in mind, not rest on that to say like, great, let's pull everybody back in 5 days a week, nine to burn the midnight oil. We want to kind of have that as a normal kind of a cultural commonality of our organization to kind of give people the flexibility to be able to deal with life, however it comes, with different PTO. We've enhanced our PTO side of the house, giving services to children and parents. And so there's a lot of kind of tack-ons that we're trying to do to be able to kind of give the candidates and the new employees opportunities to deal with life without having to feel bad about missing work.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate that. And, similarly, Christiane, it seems that, that within Jonathan's take, within NBC Universal, they would like to offer that opportunity for a, hybrid workspace appreciation when possible. Now, would you say it's a similar circumstance at Foot Locker, again, speaking that, if we do eventually get into a full-on office reopen in terms of like COVID being a thing of the past, do you think there would still be some embracing of the hybrid workspace with those factors present?
Yeah, I would say that from moving forward, I think after everyone has kind of had a taste of what the virtual side looks like, and granted whether they love being fully virtual or they're craving going back into the office or having some sort of a mix, I think the hybrid model is definitely going to be much more prominent moving forward. Echoing what Jonathan had said, I think it also depends on the function. So the way that we're looking at it at Foot Locker is like 3 different personas. So those who are going to be fully remote, those who are going to be hybrid, and those who are going to be in the office 5 days a week, which is a much smaller population, but it depends on the work that you're doing. So my specific team, from a TA perspective, we're going to be remaining fully virtual even when the office is open up. Our customer, if you will, are the candidates. So we're mostly externally facing. So yes, we have meetings with hiring managers, but so many of our conversations are with candidates. So whether I am sitting in the New York office, sitting at my home here in New Jersey, sitting at a coffee shop in California, it doesn't matter. I can have those conversations from anywhere. But I think also another piece that Jonathan had mentioned is being able to kind of use that flexibility as a negotiating factor. So I've spoken with a handful of candidates where our offer or our opportunity is much more appealing to them because of the flexibility, because they don't have to relocate. They can remain where they're living, as opposed to another opportunity where they'd have to be going into the office 5 days a week, or they'd have to relocate for that position. So I definitely think it's a negotiating factor as well, and will continue to be going forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Speaking of, speaking of location, Michelle, I wanted to dive into a little bit about how much the location can be a focal point into a position. So, now in terms of looking at an idealized kind of new career, say you wonder upon the absolute perfect new fresh job opportunity, it's in a new location. There is a possibility for a hybrid workspace attachment over there. What's your level of excitement about this? Is this something that would still be of interest to you as a candidate?
I think it would have to be really, really persuading for me to relocate, just because the field that I expect to go in, it requires a lot of like licensure and certification, and that varies state by state. So if I became a clinical psychologist in New York and wanted to relocate to New Jersey, California, Washington, I would have to get licensed there as well. And that can be a whole process in itself, depending on state requirements. So it would have to be like really enticing, great compensation, great benefits, and provide me with the opportunity of growth that I absolutely could not resist. Yeah.
Making an offer that you couldn't refuse.
Yeah, essentially. And like, I guess as of right now, I would consider applying to jobs in different states, only if it's remote though, because just due to like finances and things. But yeah, other than that, like it would pretty much have to be like a perfect opportunity for me.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. Mark, would you happen to say that your reflection would be similar, different? What do you think?
I feel like I was brought to play the opposite of Michelle. I have an easy pass and I'm pre-TSA check. I'm ready to go wherever. So long as the party is good and the people are great, I'd be happy to relocate. And in my experience, sometimes these contracts are only like 3 to 6 months. So I'm happy to be near my friends and family who I have in many cities. Yeah, down for whatever the occasion calls for.
I didn't know that I was going to be bringing in two candidates that have the opposite perspective, but I mean, I'm happy that we did it. If anything, this gives really insightful feedback to get like those differing perspectives. We couldn't ask for anything better.
I feel for Michelle though, in that she has certifications that are state by state, because that's absolutely has to limit your options and in a way that I have never had to deal with. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are very, very like important factors that take on a whole new level of importance and necessity when, we're entering into a career that Michelle is going into. And obviously nothing could be more important. Well, so Christiane, I wanted to kick over to you for something that, both you and Jonathan have been talking about quite a bit. It's something that pretty much every recruiter has been talking about these days as well, and that it's one of the most prevalent circumstances right now in modern recruiting, which is the candidate experience. I know based on your bio that it's something that is near and dear to you and what you have worked towards over into Foot Locker. And so, how have you been going about managing the candidate experience these days? What are you doing to really keep the candidates engaged?
Yeah, so I would say the first piece, and I think from like the start of my recruiting career to where I am now, it's communication. So my team, and specifically my manager, would very much categorize me as an over communicator. But I think in doing that, you're able to form better relationships. So from the candidate perspective, it's from that very first conversation with them, laying out what the process is going to look like, letting them know when they're going to be receiving updates from me. Even if there's not an update, checking in with them saying, hey, just doing a pulse check here, there's no update, but haven't forgotten about you. So I think it's those little pieces from the communication perspective that really make the process that much better for candidates. We received so much feedback of how much they appreciate those different pieces. So I think a lot of candidates, and I think it was kind of mentioned in the chat, a lot of candidates are ghosted and they don't receive feedback. Whereas I think it's one of our most important components of what our process looks like is to ensure that everyone receives some sort of notification if they're chosen, if they're not chosen, whatever that looks like. So the loop is kind of always closed. I think from our perspective, and this might be a little bit different from Jonathan, but with Foot Locker, every candidate is a potential customer as well. So keeping that in mind also, if someone has a really bad experience with Foot Locker from a recruitment perspective, they may go up and say, all right, I'm never shopping at Foot Locker again. So we obviously don't want that. But I think communication is key, and just really kind of managing the process, holding their hand through the process, getting feedback as quickly as possible, and really managing expectations. Even to the turn down. When I turn down candidates, it's such a, and this is going to sound so ironic, but it's such a wonderful conversation that at the end, the candidates really feel good because they're happy they received the feedback. We're keeping in touch for the future. So I think it's how you go about the communication is so crucial to the candidate experience.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. I think that everyone can most certainly agree that more transparency on the side of the candidate and the recruiter can only be a good thing. I think that's only how we more meaningful roles. And Jonathan, would you happen to say that, in your particular experience managing the candidate experience, that it would be also similar in terms of transparency to engage the candidates better, or is there anything else that you felt was making a pretty large scale difference these days too?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Travis.
Oh, I think you just muted yourself for a second there, Jonathan.
Sorry about that. I was just saying, I was just going to for not being on the opposite side of the coin of Christiane. I agree with everything that she's saying and not having the market battle. But no, I agree. It's definitely communication. The only thing I would add is also kind of the timeline of it. I know we've had a lot of discussion around other companies having long drawn out months, 17 rounds and projects and take home assignments. But we want to be more efficient. We want to be more streamlined in that. We want to really curate the slate of interviewers by saying, here's going to be the 4 people who are going to interview the candidates. They're going to be 4 different topics that these interviews are going to tackle with this one candidate, so we can kind of come back at our debrief and add our different points of view to that. So it goes along with communication as to hopefully we would love to have when you apply to role with NBC Universal, in the first week and a half, you're going to get a response from the recruiter if we're interested in your candidacy. And so there's going to be interview requests or something to the form of a communication the first kind of 10 days. But also letting that, it's going to be a process that we're going to hit these points of NBC Universal, of our culture, of the jobs scope and specs, and get to that finish line. And so, when we say, hey, congrats, you got an offer, that was a 4-step process meeting with the members of the team. Congratulations, you have an offer. Or to Christiane's point of hey, you were a great candidate. We want to speak to you for other opportunities. You went in a different direction. A candidate can have a streamlined, efficient process, met people that can add to their Rolodex, and stay engaged with that company. As opposed to kind of the Foot Locker, I didn't even think about that totally. If you have a bad experience with Foot Locker, you have that stigma in your head of not wanting to kind of go back there. I would say that's not really our reality. If we have a bad experience with, NBC, I'm sure you're still going to watch Super Bowl and not say, let's turn it off for the next 3 hours and not see who won. But we definitely want to be cognizant of that. And what I like to ask in my process is, what could we do better as a company? And we have our new streamer Peacock that's out there competing against the other streamers, the war on eyeballs. And I've heard the feedback of it started out clunky, or my TV doesn't really kind of adapt to kind of the UI experience of it. So we take that back to the hiring managers. It's outside the scope of probably the role, but hey, it's information that we would like to kind of capitalize on. So I would definitely say communication and the timeline and the process setting of expectations.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we're raising some very, very important points here. And actually, you know, this is where I would kick things back to Michelle and Mark, you know, for their own take on a different question. But before we do that, I do think that we have something important here on the candidate experience that I did want to explore just a little bit further with Christiane and Jonathan, with the both of you, since I know it is so pressing, and that, you know, we can harp on this just a little bit more, which is that, and I feel that most recruiters do happen to feel, and you guys have said as much, that the candidates happen to hold all the power. You know, we need to be as transparent as possible and reflect everything we possibly can to them. Do you think on the recruitment side of the fence, I'll start with you, Christiane, that do you think that there is anything that recruiters can do to get the power back? You know, is that going to take something like a complete and total shift in the market? Is that going to be something in terms of a complete and total shift in the business, or something else that you think people aren't even thinking about right now?
Yeah, so I would say I almost see it as, I don't necessarily see it as candidates having the full power. I think that's different than it being a candidate market. So what I mean by that is when we're kind of going through the process, so part of it is us, of course, selling Foot Locker to the candidate, but they also need to sell themselves to us. So I think it's being able to kind of show, and it speaks to a little bit of Mark's point earlier, of what are the components that's driving this candidate, what are their motivators. So if it's from a philanthropy perspective, being able to speak to what they're doing in the community. And if it's a flexibility perspective, being able to speak to the flexibility that we offer with Foot Locker. Is it the growth that we have? There's so many stories of individuals starting out as a store associate, and 15 years later, they're now a VP, head of a department. There's so many of those stories at Foot Locker. So I think being able to speak to that and being able to speak to the growth, not all organizations offer that from a culture perspective, from a growth perspective, from a community involvement perspective. So I think it's being able to touch upon the aspects that make you as an organization different from other organizations is huge. And I think if a candidate is playing a little bit of hardball or hard to get, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a turnoff, but we want people who are going to be super excited about the work that we're doing. We have an awesome team. We're doing incredible things, again, within the community, as an organization, within retail. And if someone isn't really pumped about that, do we really want them to be a part of our team? So, and I don't mean that in a, oh my gosh, we're so great and fantastic type way, but I think you kind of have to have that mindset a little bit. So I think it's being able to speak to the different pieces that we as an organization bring to the table to kind of maintain that balance of power. Hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Well, I think it most definitely. Jonathan, I think we're ready to jump in. Go right ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was just gonna say, to that point, I think we lean into the candidate market. I think this is a time where candidates, especially women and people of color, didn't ask for what they felt like they were worth or valued. And now this is the time to do it. And this is the time to say, hey, this is what I am expecting. Here's what I've done in my prior role, and here's how I would, feel valued in my next role. And us as recruiters and as HR professionals, we lean into it and say, I hear you, here's what we have to offer. Here's what the trajectory looks like here. I can take this back to my, HR partner, my finance partner, or the hiring manager to be an advocate for you to say like, hey, we want this candidate. Here's where we're gonna have to go. And so it's less about, kind of switching the dynamics of the power struggle, but it's more so of saying, hey, if that's what you want, if that's what you feel that's your worth, let's kind of work to see if we can close this deal. And if not, to Christiane's point, it may not be the right time. I mean, there are plenty of times where I'm still keeping in contact with candidates years down the line, and I interviewed them for a manager role and I have a VP role, and I'm saying, I cannot believe we're having this conversation again. If it didn't work then, maybe it can work now. And so that's just the kind of the power of the brand, the power of the relationship and the communication style of it, by having someone check in maybe once or twice a year, that candidate's going to feel like, wow, this is a potential for my next employer. But coming to the table and say that let's just say your year-end numbers had this percentage of people of color hires or women that's uptick from years prior, and you're able to kind of like, balance the power from the employee standpoint, just speaks to kind of retention and changing the dynamics of the company. So I think we lean into it.
So Michelle, Christiane and Jonathan were able to share some of their perspectives on, how they're able to gauge the candidate process by working through some of the things that happen to frustrate them while, reaching out to the right kind of candidates in their own particular job recruiting processes. If I were to ask you on your side, what is your largest frustration with the job application process today?
I think my largest frustration is kind of the same as what Jonathan and Christiane mentioned, and that's the lack of transparency, either from the employer or the employee or the candidate. And, I hesitate to apply for positions that have like too general of a job description. For example, I've found like research positions that say, daily tasks include like data collection and analysis using statistical software, but like what kind of statistical software? Like I know how to use this program, but I don't know how to use that one. And then also just on the communication side, as they kind of talked about, candidates often are applying for multiple positions and receiving multiple offers. And if a company is not reaching out to me in a timely manner, that kind of reflects poorly on them, and it kind of makes me reevaluate whether I actually want to work at this company. Also, because if I'm receiving other offers, I may choose one company over maybe even like my ideal company just because of the lack of communication. And I think having closure as well, like knowing, okay, this company declined me, so I can focus my time and energy on applying for different roles rather than just sitting there waiting for a response back and never getting that. I think that wastes a lot of my time. And it probably also wastes a lot of the employer's time as well.
I don't think you're wrong about anything that you said, Michelle. I think that makes a lot of sense. Mark, would you happen to share those thoughts, or your biggest frustration overall in the job application process these days?
I would say just for me, it's a numbers game largely, where I'll apply to many positions that interest me. It could be they had a great Super Bowl spot, or I always wanted to do this as a kid. So not hearing back is a kind of soul crushing thing to not get from some of these companies and dream jobs you worked for. But I've found, and I don't think I'm answering your question in terms of like what frustrates me the most, but I've found just sending your resume out to everyone is not the best approach, but instead hyper focusing, doing a lot more in getting connections to LinkedIn or more about people that are on the different teams. And if posted that was of it, but there's a lot of ambiguity there.
Mark, I think we might be losing you a little bit on your Wi-Fi. We might be blipping out just a little bit. So that's
like this with certain people.
I'm sorry.
I feel making connections through talks like this is a great way to spend your time, rather than just like throwing darts at a board and hoping someone calls you back.
Excellent. I think a lot of different job applicants will wind up sharing a lot of those concerns. It absolutely sucks when you don't hear back from somebody that you're interested in. And it's part of that whole ever prevalent ghosting process that's not just in the dating world. It is very much in the business world through and through. And it's always frustrating. Mark, you actually shared a little bit about your job application process in that answer. Michelle, how would you describe your overall job application process these days? Is it somewhat similar? Like, if you can, if you're able to walk us through a little bit of a day in your typical job search process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for starters, it's never really a day. It can last for like a few days, a few weeks, a few months. But usually I do like quick Google searches, maybe look at LinkedIn alerts because I have those set up, or ask professors and friends if they know of any opportunities. And then once I get like a decent amount of opportunities I might be interested in, I go over them just to see which ones I really want to apply for. So looking at qualifications, daily tasks, and then identifying like what I need to prepare for the application. So resume or CV, cover letter, letters of recommendation for some programs or positions. And then I actually like wait a day or two before I look at them again just to gauge if I'm really interested. And then if I am, I'll research the company, maybe look at their other job postings in case I missed one that I may be interested in. And then once I have like my collection, I get all my materials ready, I update my CV or resume specifically for that position, ask people to look over it. And then once that's kind of all done, that's when I submit my application.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate you giving the insight over onto that. And, flipping it quickly back over to Mark, since you had started to work a little bit of this into your answer too, I figured just so we can cover, this aspect entirely, since it's, I think, going to be very, very important for folks that are in the job market right now, just how much or how they're prioritizing their efforts in the job application process. Are they going about it the right way? Before flipping back over to Christiane and Jonathan, it's what's your typical application process go like? Very similar to Michelle's or a bit different on your end?
I could learn a lot from Michelle, and I don't think I'm as fastidious as she is, though for the different roles, they might want 6 of my 20 skills, and those 6 are never exactly prominent in my portfolio. So there's a lot of shuffling around. There's a lot of digging into hard drives and showing, oh yeah, I have that skill set. And in every CV or every cover letter, I'm trying to convince them that I meet the things that they're looking for and reading in between the lines. There is a lot of effort spent on my part just trying to make sure my resume isn't like thrown out because it didn't meet certain requirements, or I didn't also include a cover letter or said something that spoke directly to the job posting. But there's a lot to the point earlier. There's a lot of unreturned messages and applications, and the typical, as soon as you hit like submit, you get the thanks for applying. We receive thousands of emails or applications every day. So if you don't hear back, thank you. And some sites, even I believe Google will say like, when's the last time you applied? If you've applied within the past 6 months, please allow a certain amount of time. So there's a lot of waiting, and sometimes there's a lot of last minute, hey, Mark, I need an art director on this project. And then there's like, when it rains, it pours.
Absolutely. Isn't that just the way that it goes for everything? So, Christiane, both Michelle and Mark were talking quite a bit about transparency. And, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about pay transparency these days and being completely upfront about the pay expectations right in a posting?
Yeah, so this is something that I think is huge from both perspectives, from a candidate perspective, but also from a recruitment perspective. So for me personally and our team in general, we ask about compensation in the first conversation. So not, hey, nice to meet you, what are you looking for salary wise? We have a conversation, we learn about the experience. But at the end of the conversation, I always ask what their compensation expectations are. Obviously, legally, we can no longer ask, what their current package is, but we always ask what their expectations are. And the way, I don't want to say pitch it because I think it has a negative connotation to it, but the way I pitch it is that I want to make sure we're at least in the same ballpark, because I don't want to put someone through a process and then realize in the 11th hour that we're on 2 totally different pages from a comp perspective, and we've just wasted the candidate's time, we've wasted the hiring team's time. So I kind of explain it that way, and as long as we're roughly on the same page and in the same ballpark, we continue to have the conversation, and I'll typically share then like what the range is, if there's a bonus target, if there's LTI that comes with the position. So I'm very transparent from that perspective, because I think it's just important in terms of keeping everyone's time in mind. And if someone's going to be looking for $50,000 more than what we're offering, I wouldn't want to put them through the process and kind of waste their time. So I think having that conversation right from the start is huge.
Have you ever had a circumstance where someone has like dramatically undershot their the pay expectation for what the role is? Along, like, I know it very often happens where, like, a candidate will overshoot, and if like, say, in that same perspective, like, if someone's dramatically undershot their salary expectations, or say somebody has the right profile, you really want this candidate, but they overshoot, do you still end up working with them, or what's the usual process there?
I think it's case by case, which is probably a really annoying response, and I apologize. But I do think it's case by case. I think it depends on the team and the department that I'm working with, and it depends on the position. So if it's a newly created role and I know it's a super important position that's critical for the business, I'll be transparent with them and let them know, hey, I understand this is what you're looking for right now. This is what the position's budgeted for. Let me go back to the hiring team and have a conversation with them, share your background, and see what their feedback is. Because who knows, they might see your profile and say, okay, I would totally flex for this person. So, and then I go back and I follow up with the candidate. If someone undershoots what they're looking for, or if they're significant, so are you asking if they're significantly lower, or if they're undershooting, but they really want more?
If their salary expectations are like surprisingly lower than what the position is calling for.
Yeah, then I'll let them know that, what our budget is, and be transparent with them from that perspective and say, yeah, absolutely, what you're looking for, or an increase from there is definitely within our ballpark and what we're looking for. So I think we would definitely continue to have the conversation there if someone's looking for significantly less, but if someone's looking for significantly more, but they're an all-star, we would definitely kind of, share that with the hiring manager and then be able to circle back with feedback.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And, Jonathan, giving you that 1-2 punch as well of, pay transparency and salary expectations, within like that screening process. How do you happen to manage those expectations?
Yeah, we're such a global, but of course national company where we're dealing with that already. So our Colorado positions, by Colorado law, you have to post your salaries on the job descriptions. I think there are certain other states that are going to start to fall soon. We're very close with like big justice and employment law from a government standpoint to kind of pulse to see where the direction is going. And now Connecticut might potentially be coming next. And so we have a big population of our employees that are, sports, media tech, and our Stanford media groups are out there. And so we're talking to employment law kind of about like, how do we handle and how do we deal with this? I would never forget this. They just told me, like, it's the way of the future, get used to this. So there's going to be more that's going to happen. There's going to be more transparency. It's a two-way street. And I think from the recruiting standpoint, HR, of course, had head in hand, like, oh gosh, how do we prepare for this? Candidates are like, yeah, I get to see what you guys were paying. So I think from a recruiting standpoint, we're on the fence. I think it's pay transparency is like, hey, if you're applying into the role, you read the job description, you saw the range, you're knowing where we're at without having to kind of do the dance a little bit later. But at the same time, we're having to work with our, in-house groups in finance and HR about, if we're going to be compelling, if we're going to be very kind of one of the shining stars out there in the market, we're having to kind of constantly do more salary surveys, do more Cathar and Kroner surveys to make sure we're up to par. If we're paying typically for a role that's 25th, 30th percentile, we have to up that to 50 or 60% to stay competitive. So again, I know at the end of the day, we're in a business and we're wanting to kind of, maximize, our product and revenue, but at the same time, we're going to have to ride with the business cycle of what's going on from an economic standpoint. So as long as we have, compelling, comps out there, we're going to go out there and do the best job we can. So I just say that I think to Christiane's point, where we can't ask, legally what their comp packages are, we only ask expectations. There's going to be more tack-ons that are going to start to happen. That's just going to be across the board that we're just going to have to deal with and lean into.
It sounds like there's a lot of very underlying common sense themes of transparency never hurts anybody and only helps business move forward. And that's encouraging, I think, for absolutely everybody in this entire process too. So moving on from here, so like looking at the time that we're at, it does look like we actually have, a few different interesting questions that are popping up in chat, and I want to be acquiescing of everybody's time over to that area as well. So that being the case, I thought I'd ask one more question before going into our chat inquiries over here. That would be from our job applicants and end up having that asked to our talent acquisition professionals on the panel's Q&A. And that would be starting, I think, with Michelle. If there was, and this could be answered by either Christiane or Jonathan, or if that's something that, we would need some time and everything to allocate towards that, that's fine too. But that question would be, if there was one thing you would most like to ask a recruiter or a hiring manager, what would that be? And Michelle, I want to know if you want to, take it first, and then we can go to Mark from there.
Well, I mean, I kind of also had questions about like pay transparency and things like that, but that was pretty much answered. As of right now, I can't think of anything that pops into mind. Nothing pops into mind right now, but just give me like a little bit to kind of think on it.
That's okay. We don't have to put you on the spot with anything like that. I can, if you want, I can flip that over to you, Mark, and also in turn, Christiane and Jonathan, I can actually ask you guys if there was one thing you'd like to ask the candidates and applicants. That's open to you as well. Before we get over to there, Mark, did you have a particular question that you would most like to ask if you could, in an ideal situation, a recruiter or a hiring manager?
Sure, very open-ended. Maybe I wouldn't ask this in an interview, but like what motivates you? Is it getting the right applicants, but 80% of the salary that was allocated for that role, or is it getting someone who's going to be with the company for 10 years and eventually become CEO? Like it's going to be different for different roles, yes, but like, yeah, what motivates you in your role as a talent acquisition?
And I suppose, Jonathan, why don't you start things off?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, honestly, I think it's the diversification of what NBC Universal offers. I think, there's, obviously want to be part of a company that has multiple revenue streams. But what motivates me is that I get to make impact. I get to partner with the business. I get to sit down with executives who I think oftentimes we think they know all and all be all, but sometimes just kind of the simple, additive of like, the market, how it's dictating, where the candidate's going, where the certain generation is going. And bringing kind of outside of the box candidates to the table and thinking that, hey, I would have never entertained this person had, we not consulted together, and they're saying like, let's make an offer to that person, and that person's ideas and diverse thought background really kind of changes the hegemony, the culture of that particular group that they never thought they needed before. And so when I kind of look back and watch, those particular hires get elevated or promoted, it's almost like a proud teacher. I'm like, they graduated, they went on to grad school, they're killing it in their field. And you were part of that. Specifically for me, I get to watch I love documentaries. I get to watch documentary and watch the credits roll and say, I definitely brought that person on. I reached out to them, blind faith, and they got through the process and they're able to kind of get a credit. And don't get me started on Emmys or Golden Globe nominations, that'll just shooting for the stars. But if I'm able to kind of, again, make an impact in an industry that typically ran a certain way for a long time and that they're trying to kind of try new opportunities, and if I get to be a part of that, that's what motivates me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. I think that's a great answer. I think that provides just the perspective that we're looking for. How about you, Christiane?
So I swear Jonathan and I didn't meet beforehand and prep our responses together. But I think it's the connectivity. So I think from the very start, when I was working for a staffing agency, and it's different on the agency side because you're kind of maintaining relationships with candidates and kind of constantly filling a lot more positions. And that was super rewarding because you're helping people find work, you're helping people find a position that they're so excited about and passionate for, and it just feels good. So it's like that matchmaking aspect. So now on the corporate side, that aspect is still there, but it's different. So you're bringing people on to an organization that you are so passionate about and that you believe in and that you're so excited to work for and to kind of get up in the morning and work for every day. And I know that sounds outrageously corny, but I think it's true. Like I tell candidates that all the time when they ask me what's keeping me here, and it's the people that we work with. But I think being able to bring people into the organization and then see how they progress within Foot Locker. And it is very much that proud teacher, that proud parent moment of like, oh my gosh, I hired them 5 years ago. They've been promoted twice now, or they've moved into different departments and they're still loving it the way they did on day one. So I think it's that that connectivity piece and that being able to make an impact on people and their careers and how that kind of affects their broader personal lives and everything. So I definitely would very much echo what Jonathan had mentioned. Unplanned.
Hey, classic answers are classic answers for a reason though too, for a very, very good reason. That's a big reason of why I got into recruiting myself as well, to feel that tangible connection, of fostering a connection and watching it grow over time. Michelle, did you have any other question that came to mind that you wanted to ask a hiring manager or recruiter?
Yeah, this was actually inspired by something that Mark mentioned in his question. When he kind of asked, like, what motivates a hiring manager or talent acquisition recruiters. Mark had mentioned, are you looking for a candidate who may expect to stay there for like 10 years or something? I find that a lot of professionals now, whether they've like recently graduated from college or wherever they are in their professional life, that a lot of us aren't really sure what we want to do. And, me being someone who wants to attend grad school, I can't afford to stay at a company for maybe like 5 years or the 10 years. And that's actually been a consideration when I've received offers for full-time jobs. It's like, do I accept this full-time job but only stay there for a year, or do I take more part-time jobs? So I just kind of wanted to ask about your perspective on that.
Yes, since we went from Jonathan to Christiane, do you want to start things off for this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Michelle, I think that's a really huge point, especially now. And I think as we're seeing more and more, and I assume Jonathan would probably echo this as well, that the resume that kind of comes across as more jumpy per se is becoming more and more prevalent. So I think that's partly the influence that we need to have as talent acquisition with hiring managers and hiring teams to be able to educate them on, hey, like, we're going to be seeing this more and more. So whereas it's almost kind of a personal bias that a hiring manager might have, that I think probably a lot of us have, because we've been so used to, okay, great, this person's been here for 5 years and then 7 years, wonderful. Like they have a sense of allegiance to the organization. And I'm going to throw out a data point, which may be slightly off, but you'll kind of get the point. I think with Gen Z, I think the average tenure is about 1 year. So we're going to be seeing that more and more. So I would say do what kind of works for you personally, but I do think that the shorter stints within jobs is going to be becoming more and more common and more acceptable to be able to kind of progress your career that way. So I think it's something that we're going to be seeing more and more of.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, especially if you've been kind of like almost like a lifetime freelancer or consultant, I think that's almost expected. I know different, candidates definitely have multiple jobs or freelance opportunities at once. So I think for you, and I also hate to have an annoying answer, but it's also case by case. If you're interviewing for a role and we're actively recruiting for a role to be a successor to your manager, that gives it longevity and that changes our direction on how we interview as a candidate. And that doesn't have to mean like, oh, well, they want me to stay beyond a certain time, ixnay, that's off the shelf. It's more so, hey, they could provide opportunity for me to kind of, have the best of both worlds. I can speak to it, personally. I would, that was the main motivator for me to go back to grad school to get my MBA, is because I was part of a company that didn't make me choose either you stay with us and don't go to school, or go to school and then, kind of not have the opportunity. So what I did was I worked it out with my manager and my group that I was able to do both. And so I was able to continue my trajectory, my career, and not have a pause on that and go back to school. And of course, it wasn't easy, but it was something that I felt like I was enriched by, and that really spelled for me the type of company that I was with. So I didn't have to choose from that mind frame. But to Christiane's point, very much so, more so the shorter stints are going to be more prevalent. But we also want to make sure that we're investing if we're going to, relocation or sign-on bonuses or tuition reimbursement. All of that comes with a package, and that's not just being with the company for 6 to 9 to a year, months to a year. It's more so of like, hey, how can we make this a partnership, and how can we make this a two-way street to make sure that you're feeling fed and fulfilled?
Like that quite a bit, guys. Thank you very, very much for those fresh takes. I think that's, I'd be speaking for Michelle by saying that's what we're looking for. But hopefully that, I think that provides a very, very authentic summation. And I'm realizing now I need to make more of a time to look in the bottom right screen of my computer, because I now realize that we have just sailed right through the timeline over here, and we still have some interesting questions in chat. So I just wanted to take a brief amount of time to cap things off with some of the questions that folks have been presenting over to us in chat, and allocate them to you guys, and whoever felt the most interested could chime in when you have your thoughts. I had a great question from Brittany Love here, which was, what was the best strategy or the best practices to connect with or identify talent from a competitor, or who was already working with without coming off as a poacher or a headhunter? So the best practice to connect with somebody who might have been initially working with a competitor, and how do you get onto their radar, or is there, or I guess, would there really be any kind of ethical issues in that kind of speaking?
Yeah, I can start there. It might be a bit different with Jonathan. I know from our perspective, I mean, there's certain organizations that we can't recruit from. So, and that's typically our top vendor. So we can't poach from Nike or Audi or, any of the top brands that we work with. From a competitor perspective, so if we were to look at, just for sake of an example, like a Dick's Sporting Good or a Finish Line, if the question is how do we approach them, I would say that my approach is pretty similar to how I would approach anyone else. Is more so just reaching out to them, letting them know that their experience looks great. They might not be looking, so I always kind of acknowledge that in my message of, hey, you might not be looking right now, and I totally understand that. Even if it's just having a conversation to network, I'd love to do that. So I would use kind of my outreach to be relatively the same, whether it's with a competitor or someone's from a completely different industry. But for us, there are specific vendors that we're not able to poach from.
Yeah, same with us. We do have a non-solicit list when it comes to production companies, or even some big four consulting companies that we've done work with to kind of change our business model. We aren't able to kind of poach from those teams as well. I would, in the same fashion, if they're not on the non-solicit company list, I would just reach out to them, just letting them know, hey, if our opportunities to step up from where they're at, if they're a manager and I'm recruiting for a director role, I would try to entice them that way. I'm always also kind of conscious, because it happens a lot of times in media, if we're bringing over an executive, let's just say from Paramount over to NBC Universal, there's like a year-long beached situation where they cannot pull their team over to to our company if they have, if they were high enough in the organization and we're pulling them over to our side. But all fair in love and war if those people apply directly into the role and we didn't reach out to them. So I'm always trying to kind of see if I'm going to go after someone, did we recently bring a higher up in that organization over to us? Because I would definitely want to check with HR and legal about being able to approach them. But yeah, it's all fair. And, if we're interested in someone and they're not on the list, for us to reach out to via LinkedIn or their email to see if they would be willing to talk and chat.
All fair in recruiting and war, as long as we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's and doing the due diligence. I actually have a question here over onto our candidate side from our own Uma Sailesh. So Uma asks, in terms of the interview process itself, would 3 levels of the interview process be viewed as a long drawn process from the candidate perspective? Mark or Michelle, whoever would like to chime in with your thoughts about that, would you consider that a particularly long-winded interview process?
Not at all. I'd expect 3 rounds actually.
I actually think it would be pretty long. Just because I guess most of the interviews that I've been in, they are about 30 minutes to an hour. And by the second interview, you've already interviewed me for 2 hours, which I think is usually enough time for the recruiter to gather enough information about me, also enough time for me to gather information about the company and the position. I would consider 3 if it was a position that I really wanted. Maybe if it was for like a manager position or maybe like president or vice president, then I would see 3 as like fitting.
We're always getting total opposite perspectives from Michelle and Mark. I love it. This is probably the best way to get fresh perspectives from a panelist pool. So Daphne Legrand had asked, I guess this is something that I suppose any one of our panelists could address. I'm puzzled about something, maybe someone in the meeting can assist. I was referred to a company for an interview and I had interviewed with the manager. After the interview, the manager said she just took over her role and she will get back to me after they've figured out their annual budget. It's been 2 months and I haven't heard anything back. What should I make of this? I guess Jonathan and Christiane, this can go into, I guess, part of the ambiguity that Mark and Michelle were talking about in terms of sometimes the ghosting process. But I guess maybe in your own particular perspective and opinion, do you think there's merit in reaching out again? Or do you think, I guess we could say, is that a common circumstance where the manager can take over that role in different roles that you've worked on? Or is there merit in reaching back out to the hiring managers in this process?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I'm not sure the special or the circumstance of that particular position. I personally kind of hate leaving candidates in limbo. If you haven't followed up before, I mean, feel free, if it's still posted, follow up again, just want to kind of check in. I try to warn against my hiring managers of doing something like that, having an ambiguity, leaving someone in limbo, especially if, the candidate was really excited about the role. But for reasons that could happen is a menu of reasons of, they're figuring out budget, they lost budget, they're going to promote someone into their role, they're going to have a lot of rollover, they have someone else identified, or they're testing the market, which I often hate, or they might make that role a contractor freelance temp to perm, which again, I also hate. But there could be a myriad of reasons as to why that happened, but I don't think there's anything wrong with just checking in. And what I always like to say is, add a special fact about the company, like, notice you had a great opening or this product will launch out. Just want to kind of check in on that, just to know that, show them that you're still engaged. But it's a little bit of a yellow flag for me if it's been a couple of months and they haven't gone back to you.
Yeah, I would agree there, and I think I would look at it from 2 ways. One, if you have a point of contact as a recruiter, I would probably reach out to them first. It seems like in this instance, the hiring manager or like the manager that you interviewed with is your only point of contact. So I would definitely say it warrants just like a gentle follow-up, just checking in. I think having a fact about the company or any update about them, I think would be a really great point to add in there. And even just checking in, saying, hey, just reiterating my interest, I'm here and ready when you are. Wording it kind of that way, I think, is always appropriate. I think that's a huge part of why we like to kind of manage the process as recruiters, because we're able to kind of handle that follow-up and be able to manage that process and be consistent with one candidate to the next and not leave people hanging. So I think that's almost kind of your prime example of the importance of having a recruiter manage the process, as opposed to it being a little bit of a free-for-all where the hiring manager handles some, the recruiter handles some. I think consistency is key.
Most definitely agree. That covers a lot of bases, Christiane. Thank you. And hopefully, Daphne, hopefully that answers your question as well. So we also have another question here, again from Brittany Love. From a corporate perspective, what do you all think of the effectiveness of behavioral-based interviews aligned to specific competencies, specific to the organization or team?
I'll go first with this one.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I think behavioral-based questions is really important. I think it's being able to have a balance between the technical side and making sure someone has the technical skills and the skill set, or the ability to learn specific skill sets that maybe that they don't have. So I think the balance between the technical side, but also behavioral-based questions. I think a lot of it also depends on the role that you're applying for and the function. So I think interviewing for an IT position is going to be a little bit different than interviewing for an HR or a marketing position. So I think being able to kind of understand what the key competencies are for that person from a technical perspective, but also from a behavioral perspective. So I think those are definitely great questions to ask and to go about. And I think it's also one kind of final point. I think it's also important that those who are part of the interview process have a specific job essentially that they're going after. So I think it's not a great candidate experience for someone to interview with 3 people and they're being asked the exact same question with all 3 people. I almost, as a candidate, I would probably see that as a slight waste of time. So I think being able to align on, okay, this person's really going to be assessing the technical side, this person's going to be assessing the cultural fit or the competencies that align with the organization, and being able to kind of lot it that way is important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I mentioned before, my having that, 4 and done interview process. But according to Michelle, 4 might be too many. So we'll have to reassess that. But having kind of those 4 interviewers, having that core competency angle and tackling different types of behavioral structure, I think could be a good value add, especially for the debrief. I'm not a fan of the Myers-Briggs level of it, of here's an assessment, please fill this out. We're going to assess you based on the results and we'll talk around that. But I would definitely speak from an anecdotal standpoint. If each interviewer is tackling a different angle, just makes for a better, robust debrief to make that decision for offer.
Fantastic, Jonathan. Thank you. I want to make sure we're being cognizant of time. So I think if it's okay, I have one last question here, and then I guess we're going to be coming to our wrap up. This is from Michael Fleischman for Christiane and Jonathan. What are your thoughts about a candidate asking if there is an internal candidate in the interview process?
It's a good question. Candidates have, I've gotten time to time where they're asking how many candidates are in the process. I'm pretty kind of tight-lipped about that. Obviously, there's candidate protection laws, so we're not really able to kind of let people know how other processes are going. If there are internals truly kind of involved in the process, I would say that we're looking at internals and externals and assessing from there. If they're saying, is there an N internal, I wouldn't specify in terms of number, because I could signal, let's just say if the role had 1 direct report, that could be that person. So, which is violating that person's privacy. So I wouldn't ask if there's an internal candidate. I would more so ask, were you guys in the timeline of the process, as opposed to how many people are in the mix.
Yeah, I would second that. I think it's okay to ask if there's, an internal involved in the process, but I think that it really depends on the company, because someone who's internally interviewing, it could be a formality, it could be just a part of the way their process is. It doesn't necessarily mean that because there's an internal interviewing, they have a leg up on you. It could just be a part of their process. So I agree. I think just having an understanding of, okay, where are we at in the process? and getting that understanding is probably more pertinent to you and worrying about where you stand within the broader process, regardless of who is a part of that process.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like from both of your perspectives that, I mean, and in many of the topics that were addressed today, that transparency is key, both on the recruiting side, on the candidate side. I think that that's mutually beneficial and appreciated by absolutely everybody. And I think is going to be the key point in how the recruitment and the candidate application process moves forward in the best way possible. So, well, folks, we are here at a little after 7 o'clock. I think that this means that we unfortunately are going to have to be concluding today's event in Job Seeker Strategies. Christiane, Jonathan, Mark, Michelle, I really want to thank you again for giving all of us your time today. It was an absolute privilege. I learned an absolutely tremendous amount. It was fantastic hearing all of your insights. I can only hope, and I have a good feeling that those in attendance were really able to glean some fantastic information as well. Like I had mentioned, everyone, this will be the recording of this will be getting sent out to everybody probably about like a week or so after the conclusion of the event today. So keep your inboxes posted. We'll have it uploaded over onto SMA's YouTube page as well. And yeah, honestly, this was a great experience all around. I really hope it was the same for you folks. Thank you guys for attending today, everyone.